This podcast is hosted by the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, USA, which is about a mile from the former grounds of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. We are working to bring honest interpretations of the Carlisle Indian School that was in operation from 1879 until 1918. We honor the 7,800 Indigenous students from across the United States who came to Carlisle. The Indian School is a significant place of remembrance for our Native peoples. Because of the endurance, strength, and prayers from our people who went to the Carlisle Indian School, many of us are here today. Guwatsi relatives, hi, it's yours truly, Dr. Kauthui or Dr. Sipun. I am so honored to be here today with my grandma Barb. She adopted me as I'm here in Carlisle. So Barb Landis is here. Hi Barb, how are you?
Hello, granddaughter.
Oh, I'm so glad. I was telling Barb, I was like, you have a great podcasting voice.
Well, I'll try to. Don't set me up now for trouble here.
No, it's perfect. We're in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It is January 29th here, and it's about 45 degrees outside. We're recording at Dickinson campus, and Barb is an amazing storyteller, an amazing relative, and so I'm so glad that you're here to join us today, Barb.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here and my honor.
Oh, one question I love to start off with is what is a fun fact about you that your friends or others may not know about you?
Oh my goodness, I should have been prepared for this. I love to do jigsaw puzzles. I love to write in my journal. My friends don't know that about me. But I don't know what's a really fun fact.
Those were great facts.
I'll have to think about that one.
What kind of journals do you like to write in?
I write in my daily journal. And I like to keep a journal of our camping trips because we love to camp with our little camper. And so I keep a journal of that too.
Oh, nice. What are some of your favorite places you've been to in your camper?
Oh, well, state parks are my favorite. Pennsylvania state parks are great. They're really beautiful and they have a lot of natural beauty. And, they're just very special places that are protected. So we like to kayak and we're taking our bicycles with us. We're about to go on a trip to Florida in a couple of weeks. So we're going to head down to warmer weather for a while.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Well, as you have shared a little bit more about yourself, I'd love to just open up the space for you to tell us even more about who you are and share a little bit more about your story and how you are here in Carlisle and the surrounding area.
Sure. My husband and I came to Carlisle with our 1-year-old son back in 1976. And we've been here ever since. We moved here from Staten Island, New York. And my husband was a union carpenter. And so when we came to Carlisle, he did carpentry work. And then he started working as a project manager for a company in New York that owned nursing homes. And I stayed home with my kids. And then as my children grew older and I decided to find part-time work, I got a job at the Cumberland County Historical Society as a part-time bookkeeper. And then eventually I ended up working in the library there as a library assistant. And things kind of propelled me into a real curiosity and interest in the Carlisle Indian School. That was in 1991. The Historical Society wanted to expand their hours, and it was a place with a very small staff. I think there were about 5 of us on staff then, and we all kind of did each other's jobs when we had to cover for each other. And so I knew a lot about the different facets of the work there. It was 1991 when Marguerite retired. That's when I started really looking closely at the history that wasn't coming out of the walls at me through the genealogy kinds of materials that they had there. And it was purely Indian school, newspapers and programs and photographs those were the responses we were bringing to people from the collections at the Historical Society, because the Historical Society has been the repository of materials for the Indian School for decades. And a lot of the inquiries that were coming in to the library were not being answered because the woman who had charge of them retired. And so I started picking them up and learning about the Indian school through my connections with descendants by just answering their inquiries and doing a lot of research, and then taking coursework at Shippensburg University and expanding my knowledge about history in general. So that's really how I got started in this line of work.
Wow. So for about 3 decades or so, you've been a caretaker in your own right and caretaking for our Native people's stories and histories. So what is it like for you to connect with our Indigenous relatives who have been connected to the Carlisle Indian School and beyond? What is it like for you?
Well, it's familiar to me. It feels familiar now because I've been doing it for so long. I can remember when it wasn't familiar, and it was a very steep learning experience. Meeting and visiting with people who had holes in their history, basically. That wasn't my experience growing up. I knew who my ancestors were, and I visited with them and I had stories from them, but there weren't these holes from former generations. My experience was so different from the people I was connecting with through the Indian school inquiries. We used to kind of tease each other at the Historical Society that Fridays were Indian school Fridays, because it seemed like that's when a lot of times people were coming through, often on their way to DC, to go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs or Indian Health Service. People would stop in at CCHS on their way. And that was when we had the most exposure and connection to real live descendants, not just letters, but people who were able to communicate, who had expressions on their faces. When I first started doing this work, a lot of people really had no idea of what their family's experiences had been like. They would say to me, "Nobody ever talked about it. I want to know what happened with my grandpa. I want to know where he went on outing. I want to know what the school grounds were like, because he never talked about it." And then as time went on, and as more and more information started to get out about the Indian school, the next generations were not so quiet, were not so polite about what they think their parents experienced. And there was this kind of change that happened. People who came to visit me and my colleagues at the CCHS were angry and, beginning to articulate their anger about it, and that really changed our interpretation too. So there's been this kind of evolution of interpretation and response over the past few decades, which I'm lucky to have been doing this for so long and been able to grow and learn from that change in response.
Gosh, can you give us a little bit more insight about what is actually available at the Cumberland Historical Society in terms of archives? And I'm really curious to know too, like what were descendants interested in seeing or learning more about?
Photographs. Photographs were absolutely the most incredible and telling part of the story. There's so much in those photographs. And, Kate Timer is working on an exhibit that's going to open in April, where she's going to really look at these photographs and do a lot of interpreting about their meaning. The old phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is really important looking at this history because the photographs say so much. for a relative to come in and see a photograph of their ancestor for the first time and to recognize features in a face that look like her uncle or her cousin in that face is just a really mind-boggling and important experience. So I think the thousands of photographs, in particular the Choate images in the collections, are the key to connection, connecting with relatives. The other volumes and volumes of school newspapers, which volunteers over the decades before I started at CCHS had gone through and indexed all the proper names in those newspapers. So CCHS had a collection of names that were tied to issues of newspapers. And a researcher could go in there and look up a proper name, look up, John Doe's name, and then go and find references to that person in the school newspapers. And that was a one of a kind place to find that information. This is before the digital era. And there was an old card catalog there. I think it's still there in the inner sanctum of the CCHS. I don't know if you all know what a card catalog is. Did you ever use a card
I
catalog?
remember maybe in elementary school, I think in early 90s, I think I did.
Yeah, it's a drawer that you open, and there are all racks and racks of index cards in there, and you have to thumb through the index cards that are typically organized alphabetically. That is how people came and researched in 1991 at the Cumberland County Historical Society.
In light of, working and helping to take care and to help host really our Indigenous peoples and beyond who've come here, how do you personally process Carlisle, Pennsylvania in light of what you know and the research you've done with the Carlisle Indian School?
Well, how I process it now is very different from when I first started. Now, when I process it, I have a storehouse of knowledge that involves the political part of the story, the relational part of the story, the variations in cultures. I used to hear people say Native people, or Native American, or nation instead of plural. There was this one monolithic idea about who Indians were. And, I often in talks would say Carlisle was the place where Indians came to learn to be Indians instead of Anishinaabe or Dene or Mohawk or Abenaki. At Carlisle, they were Indians. So that all had to be unpacked for me and defined differently. I can't think of how to describe it, but it was learning about a virtual United Nations of nations instead of Native Americans. And so that was really important for me to learn because I began to recognize, especially when it came to going to the cemetery. In the early days of my work, I would often take people to the cemetery. And there were times when I realized I can't go in with them. This is not a place I can go. But with other groups, it was like, come on in. Come and see our relatives in the cemetery. I mean, I have had so many emotional experiences through this work that I never could have engineered. It is something that has been embarrassing at times, getting up at a podium and trying to speak and totally losing it and breaking down. There are times when it's opened many, many doors for me, and allowed letting myself be nurtured by someone else. So this is the kind of work that was completely unexpected. I never asked to do this kind of work. It's kind of like osmosis or something. It came to me.
Wow.
So,
It's like you're one of the chosen ones, Barb, in this work.
Well, I don't that yeah, that doesn't feel
No? It
right
sounds like they
because
see. Uh-huh.
for one thing, when I really began to delve into this and began to understood that there was a goal that I had
Mm.
with the work, that was realized through my connection with Genevieve Bell, who became my research partner in the early 1990s. So that was early on. She is an Australian anthropologist who was working on her dissertation at Stanford. And when she came to Carlisle and when we began to work together, that is when we both realized that we had a calling. And so that kind of gets framed in terms of being chosen.
Mm.
But it was not that religious.
Yeah.
We got through it with some beers and martinis, but we worked really well together, and we realized what we both wanted was to get the names to the nations.
Hmm.
She had all the names, and I had names from the newspapers, from the CCHS collections. And when those names were literally published in a book, I had access to them. And then came the digital age, and that's when things really changed for us.
Wow. Oh my gosh. My mind is just making all these connections right now because I'm thinking, like, you've been a caretaker in your own right. And as I've come here to Carlisle, now I've been here like 9 months, a different journey than yours. And here we are in the same room, sharing
Mhm.
space right now and
Mhm.
helping to advance and to amplify the stories of our people. And I'm curious to ask you, and I've heard some of these stories here and there as I've got to know you, but I want to ask you, like, what are your observations of the cemetery over all these decades?
Mm, yeah. Well, in the beginning, in the early 1990s, I was a mom with young children. So for me, going to the cemetery was really difficult because and I remember once visiting with someone who said, What do you think about this school? What do you think about this experiment?" And my answer was, "My children never went to a school where there was a cemetery." That kinda summed up how I dealt with it. It was a painful place. It was a bad mark on the landscape. It was what was not supposed to happen at Carlisle and should never have happened at Carlisle. But by the last few years, I was visited by a group of Onondaga women who were singers, and they took me to the cemetery and invited me to be with them while they sang lullabies to the children in the cemetery. They sang beautiful a cappella lullabies. It was at sunset. The sun was going down, and by the time we came out of the cemetery, it was dark, and I had been a part of the most beautiful nurturing of those children. And I really felt at peace about being there. So now I don't like to go there.
Hmm.
That was for me a good way to say goodbye to the cemetery.
Wow. Gosh, in my mind's eye, I can envision, like, I just came from there to pray. I was there probably about an hour ago praying there. And I've asked this question to different relatives in this space. And I want to ask you, like, what is it like to be a mom? And what is it like to be a grandma?
To be a mom is really a journey that is designed to prepare the child you've nursed and nurtured to leave. It's a long journey and it has a lot of ups and downs, and it involves a lot of self awareness and self learning a lot about who you are. I mean, the physical bearing of children, for me, I've been really lucky was always a really wonderful experience and fulfilling experience, and it was a good feeling experience. And luckily, I mean, I've heard a lot of horror stories, but for me, birthing was wonderful. And then my children were healthy and they were with me all the time. They were always safe. My children always were safe. I'm very risk averse. My husband likes to take risks. So they've been in situations where I've felt they were at risk, but in the long run, it has strengthened them. And so, they were prepared to go out into the world. And that for me was hard. Letting go of them, sending them out into the world is hard. But the grandchildren part is the magic part because it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about risks with your grandchildren. That's somebody else's problem. So it's just a wonderful, kind of liberating experience. And I'm the kind of grandma that my mother was. I like to make mischief. I like to be seen as a mischief maker. So that creates problems sometimes with my kids. The best kind of grandkids are the ones that are mischievous.
I love it.
And when you think about these kids, who were at the Carlisle Indian School, the gap, like for some of them, was so vast that they weren't able to share that mischief with their parents and their grandparents. And so I'm aware of that too.
Wow. In one of our conversations, you made an observation about as you navigate the Carlisle barracks that even over the years that the cemetery looks so different than how you first encountered it because many of our relatives are going home. And I think that was a powerful observation that you've made. And these next years, we'll see how that continues to unfold.
Mhm.
And I'm here to help carry the load now, in a sense, I guess, to help welcome our relatives, something you've done for many, many years here in Carlisle. And I think it's amazing that our journeys have come together in this way. Grandma Barb, it's humbling. It's a humbling experience.
It's wonderful and horrible, but, the wonderful part is that there is a guide here. There is someone here to understand and really meaningfully be the buffer, especially when you're dealing with officials. Right?
Yeah.
But that's why it's so great that you can do that. And also Jim and Kate,
Hmm.
have that same, not same, but the kind of awareness and sensitivity that can keep that alive and protect the people who are coming. And for me, it's I wanna say liberating, but that just sounds too patronizing or
Mm.
matronizing
Mm.
because, it was never my job, and so it's not like I'm liberated, but I feel this sense of peace, maybe that's what it is, that now they're taken care of. And also, with the actual archival documents, which is another side of the story with the digital archives and the information that's available and the growing awareness and growing understanding about what happened because of those documents. That's another part of the stories that really help in our community, hopefully.
For sure. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm glad to be here with you.
Oh.
I'm so glad to be here with you. And for those who may not know, Grandma Barb has really helped me acclimate here, which is very challenging at times, where it's a place for me personally where I experience a lot of microaggressions frequently. And people ask me the question all the time, like, do you have fun here? And that's still a hard question for me to answer sometimes. And what I've
Mm.
conceptualized after the winter break and coming into the new year is that I really want to focus on surviving. Of course, Carlisle, that's part of my experience is surviving here, but it's surviving and thriving. And so that too can coexist at one time. And recently, Grandma Barb took me out and showed me places where students, our Indian people, had joy, where they were able to come together. And these other parts beyond Carlisle, I mean, it's in the area, but it was outside of where the Indian school grounds are. So, what was that like for you, Barb, to take me out? And I'll share my experience after you share yours. But what was it like for you to take me out there to see where our Native people were at?
Well, I wondered if you were just accommodating me or if, if you could really experience the kind of happy part of being outside. And I was thinking about that the other day, taking you around when I was in the hot tub and I was looking up, it had been really bitter, bitter cold, horribly cold. And I was just looking up at the clouds and watching the clouds across the blue sky. Every once in a while the sun would peek out and get really warm. And I thought, those Indian kids who were sent out in this area where I live, they would have felt the same way when they looked up at the sky. We all have this kind of universal experience about being outside and running and walking and being in spaces that are not controlled by our adults or other people. So I'm really glad that you agreed to do that. And I wanted, we went to like the southeastern part of the county. We got to do the northwestern part now, right?
Yes, we need to. So when we were going out there, it definitely was a memorable time. And this was in December, right? Was it in
It
December?
was whenever it was a little cold.
Okay, yeah, it was. And when we went out, like it was such a memorable time because when I'm here in Carlisle, I'm very cognizant of how the seasons change. Well, one, I've never lived in a place where there are four seasons.
Yeah.
Like I've lived like in Arizona, like it's hot there and less hot in southern Arizona where I was at. And in Alaska, in my opinion, it's like cold and less cold. So there's really, in my opinion, not really seasons I experience. A little bit in New Mexico, but here truly in Pennsylvania, there are four seasons. And I try to be cognizant of when these seasons are here and changing because it can give a glimpse to what our Indian people experienced here.
Mhm.
And the places we went, like Boiling Springs, there's literally a spring that boils. And when we went there, I just remember thinking about the water and the connecting to the trees. And actually, my sister, Meredith, was here recently for our sunrise ceremony, and she's part of our advisory board. So she gives a lot of feedback to me and our work and what we're doing. And I was like, hey, sister, do you want to go see some of the places where our relatives went and had fun? She's like, yeah, let's go. And so we went out and it was cold. It was here in January and it's been like in the teens. So it's been
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
cold or the 20s. But we just like geared up and we walked. I told her, I was like, this is where some of our relatives came, like, sister, like, this is where they had fun. They were able to connect with each other. And I showed her the little boiling spring and she's like, I wonder if the water's cold. I was like, I don't know, go touch it. And so she literally took off one of her shoes and put her feet in it. So, but she wanted to connect in that way. And I was like, heck no, I'm not doing that. It's cold. And so, but we were there together, me and my sister, of course, who are descendants of the Indian school, like
Mhm.
literally able to walk in the footsteps of our relatives. And I wouldn't have known that unless you took me out there.
Well, your grandpas might have dipped their feet in that same bubble.
Probably. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
he might have.
Yeah, they might have. And we actually tried to go, well, we went to Gettysburg and we tried to go to Devil's Den, but we were there like right at sunset. So I think they already closed it. And I was teasing my sister. I was like, hey, sister, we're like grown-ups. She's like 18 months younger than me. And I was like, we could do whatever we want. And so we just went on a cruise. We went to Gettysburg, got a caramel apple. We went to McDonald's. Like, I'm like, we could do whatever we want. And that's what we did. And so it was just the adventure, like, the joy is something I'm trying to really help focus on here too. There is joy, there is joy in us, and even, like, it's interesting, like, when I go to the barracks pretty often, and I go because I feel connected and I don't feel alone, and I go to pray, and I spend a lot of time praying, and it's funny because recently I felt and my sister experienced this too when she was here, like, when we go around there, it's almost like our relatives kind of play with us a little bit, like, there's, like,
Mhm.
today when I went, like, I was going and I talk to myself all the time, and talk to the air basically and pray, and I was walking, and I was like, "Oh," going to pray, and then I stepped in this big pile of mud, and I was like, "Oh, shoot," and so I just laughed, and like it was, getting the mud off. And then I was in the grounds of cemetery and I was praying and I was like real deep in prayer and thought. And I was recording a voice memo for the prayer. And
Mhm.
then I was walking and then it's like 22-mile-per-hour winds, so all these elements are moving around. And again, I step in a big pile of mud. And I was like, oh, shoot. So they're like, stop praying. And I was like, oh, there's a mud puddle. Oh, yeah, a mud pile. And so I just laugh and just this little giggle, that I like, oh, it's lighthearted. It breaks it up for me, And I think that these moments happen. And when my sister was here, it was when it snowed, it was like about 3, 4 inches of snow. And we were out and, we just went outside of the barracks and we were just looking in through the gate. And my sister's like across the way, across from where the cemetery is, there's a huge grass field. So we were like on the field and she's like, I want to make a snow angel. I was like, okay. So she laid down, literally made this snow angel in like 4 inches of snow. And she got up when we're about to leave and she's like, I can't find my phone. I was like, oh my gosh, sister, what the heck? Where is it? So she went back to like where the gates are of the cemetery, and I was like, oh my gosh, sister. And she's like, I can't find it. So I called it and she's like, I hear it. And then it was buried in the snow. I was like, oh, I think our ancestors are kind of joshing with us. So there's just these moments where we've had time to just laugh at ourselves, laugh at what's happening. And that's again goes back to that surviving and thriving. And that thriving, it's the joy. And so I recognize that you're a big part of helping me find that joy here. Because it's hard sometimes, right? It's hard being here. And
Yeah.
so I just love you.
And it is hard here, and it's complicated, isn't it?
It is.
Because feeling that joy is important, but it doesn't make the hard part go away or disappear. But the fact that you can find little snatches of it here and there make you realize those kids did too.
Oh,
And, there's comfort in that. But yeah,
I have a
that
little
big butt.
have a little tear coming down my eyes right now.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, when Jackie Fairsegal and I went up and interviewed the last living female student, we asked her that question. What did you do to have fun? How did you have fun? And she got kind of wistful and she said, oh, we used to sneak up into our rooms late at night and talk Indian.
Oh.
And that was, again, the tip off that all the sad things she talked about, her loneliness, the food, finding maggots in butter when she was at an outing family and having to serve that to guests, all those horrible things that she talked about, she still had that spark. Oh, we used to sneak up into our rooms late at night and talk Indian.
Oh. About what year was that when you were talking to this descendant?
That was in 2000.
2000. Okay. So she was the last surviving student.
She was 99 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Mohawk up at Aguasasni, yep.
Oh.
And her grandkids were there and her daughters were there with us. And when she said we used to go sneak in our rooms and talk Indian, her grandkids said, but Grandma, you never taught us how to talk Indian. You never taught us how to speak Mohawk. And she looked at them with a very stern look in her face and she pointed her finger and she said, and that was for your own good.
Hmm.
And that was the Carlisle lesson, right?
Yep. Gosh. Wow. Do you think that when you were talking to her and when Jackie was talking to her, do you think she might have edited her responses or filtered because you weren't native?
Absolutely. I know that she looked at us as a couple of white teachers coming up to check on her, basically. And so everything that she told us ended with a caveat, and it was a good school, and I got a good education there.
Gosh.
So when she said we used to talk Indian, she said, but it was a good school, and I got a good education there. Yeah.
Gosh. Wow. What an honor to be able to connect with the last living student at the Indian school. Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Can you share any other memorable stories you've had with descendants or interactions with our Native people here in Carlisle or beyond? You've been across the country too and visiting other tribal nations because a lot of people know you, Barb. I don't know. When I travel across Indian country, people are like, do you know Barb Landis? I'm like, I do.
Yes, I do. Yeah. Well, the most memorable connection I've ever made is, I don't know, this might be too long a story, we'll see.
We're here for it.
When I was a kid, my dad was in the army and we moved all over the place. And we lived in Germany a couple of times. And I had a babysitter. It was a couple actually who were German. They were young. They were like old teenagers, 18-year-old teenagers. And through connections to our family and making a long story shorter, they ended up moving to the States and getting married. And, they came to the States with nothing. And they built a wonderful life for themselves and they had a lot of children and they were very successful. And they ended up living in Michigan, in Birmingham, Michigan area. And they came over to the States when I was probably 15 or 16. And fast forward to me at my computer answering emails from Indian school descendants. I got an email from this guy who wanted to find out about his relatives. His relatives were Ho-Chunk. They came from, I think, Nebraska, and he also had relatives that were Nez Perce that came from Idaho. And so I was kind of putting these things together, these names together, and realized that I had another connection to a cousin of his. So he was like one of the first relatives that I connected with another relative from another side of the family that they had never met each other. And so they were cousins. And so this fellow who was the initial contact, we emailed for probably a couple of years. And all of a sudden, I got an email from him one day and he said, "I am related to you." And it turns out that he married the daughter of my babysitter.
Wow.
He did, and he had a lot of business, and I knew all her children, so he was married to their second daughter, who I called Kitza. Her name was Catherine, but her nickname was Kitza. He did a lot of business in this area. There are a lot of defense contractors in New York, so he would travel through here to go to York, and so he came and visited me, and he brought Kitza with him. And I took him over to the barracks, and it was just an amazing thing to be connected to someone that close to my relative
Hmm.
because his mother-in-law and father-in-law were really part of our family.
Hmm.
And, that is just an amazing thing. And he went through a whole process of reconnecting with his communities through a long walking across the Michigan Peninsula, and he shared a lot of that with me. And then when we had a conference here in 2018, he came and did a ceremony with all the descendants. And it was just the most beautiful thing and such a great connection for me because I've always been the detached person looking at this history through my own cultural filters. But all of a sudden, I had a real connection,
Hmm.
that was outside of that. So I think that's probably the most profound connection I've had.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people you've met. Oh my goodness. So in closing this story time
Yeah.
soon, I wanted to ask you, like, what do you want to be known for here? Like what is your legacy, Barb?
Oh, I want to be known for being the grandma.
Aw.
I love that. I love that. I want to be known for being an elder. I'm an elder now. And I like to think I have some wisdom to share. I could be known for that.
Yes, I agree. In light of all of this, Barb, like, why did you care so much all these years ago, all these decades ago? Why did you care so much to care for our people's stories and our narratives?
Oh, I think it was the way I was raised. I mean, when I first started trying to figure out what happened at Carlisle, I found a book on my dad's bookshelf, and it was called Custer Died for Your Sins by Vine Deloria. And that book That was pretty profound too. I mean, that book was a turning point for me, and I felt like, that's how I was raised. You take care of people, you try to be respectful of people, and you have to learn how to put yourself in other people's spaces if you want to be friends and grow.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, it's a really simple philosophy, but that's why I care.
Hmm. Wow. And what advice, what encouragement or recommendations do you have to our non-native relatives who want to learn more about the Indian school or the impact of the boarding schools collectively in the United States? What encouragement would you have to learn more or how to be a part of this healing work?
It's a very simple advice, and that's to learn to be quiet and listen. Just listen. Listen to the stories that you hear from people. Just be open to being quiet and listening. Nobody cares about guilt or about paybacks, or you just need to know you can listen and learn.
Gosh. Barb, I have so many more questions to ask you, but I think right now, like I just wanted to ask you, like, is there anything else you would like to share before we close this story time?
No, I think, there's just so much happening and it's all good. As long as everybody does things in a good way, things will move forward
Hmm.
like they are.
Gosh, well, I just love you so much, Barb, and I just honor you. You have been a caretaker for decades, taking care of our Indian people stories that impacts people like me and many, many, many other descendants. And so I respect you so much and just amplify just your story here in a way that is so special to me personally. And I know many people who know you will get to know a little bit more about you as well. So thank you so much for coming and spending time with me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And I say to you, Hashtabe Gume, keep the strength, keep the endurance. As we're here in Carlisle, the Grand Canyon is unfolding. And if you don't know what that means, go listen to the other episode about how the power of healing is just unfolding here in a magnificent way. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And everyone, have a good day. Talk to you later.
Bye.
A special thank you to Alex Kluge for editing this podcast episode. Alex is one of our CFNP undergraduate student advisory fellows. I greatly appreciate you and all your willingness to help us at the center. We love you, Alex. Much thanks to Grandma Barb Landis for joining me on this podcast episode. I honor her for the decades of love, dedication, and research she has done to preserve, advance, and amplify our Indigenous narratives and living histories. She has been a caretaker of our stories and has connected with many listeners like you. Thank you for adopting me as your granddaughter and helping me to see and experience places of joy in Carlisle and in surrounding areas, the very places where my ancestors from the Carlisle Indian School experienced joy. As many of us do, love you, Grandma Barb. If you want to learn more about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, visit the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center at carlisleindian.dickinson.edu. Many thanks to Brenda Landis for teaching me the technical process of producing a podcast. Learn more about the Centers for the Futures of Native Peoples at dickinson.edu/CFNP. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X at CFNP Dickinson. Authenticity is important. You can learn more about me at amandacharmaya.com, and you spell my last name CHEROMIAH. You can also connect with me at drcharmaya on TikTok, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. You can also email me at cheromi@dickinson.edu. I honor my relatives that came here to the Carlisle Indian School. Because of them, I am here. And in the words of Chief Philip Whiteman Jr. from Northern Cheyenne and a descendant from the Carlisle Indian School, he says, I love you and there is nothing you can do about it. Hashtrame Gume Dua, thank you so much, relatives. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for listening. Until next time.